Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Birthright Podcast. My name is Taylor, and I will be your soul sister on this journey into the real and raw conversations around what I believe is our birthright to know as modern women reconnecting to our ancestral ways. And today I am so excited to have our very first guest on the podcast, Jacquelyn Miller. Jacquelyn is a women's health practitioner and the founder of Rad Wellbeing, which I am a huge fan of. I personally worked with her on my own health journey a few years ago. She's got over a decade of experience in the women's health and functional medicine space. And she's dedicated to helping women to cut through the noise of all of these wellness trends that we're seeing online and reconnect to their bodies in a very accessible way. My favorite thing about Jacquelyn is how she is able to take really complex health issues and break them down into things that are easy to understand, because it's a really overwhelming world of information out there, as you all probably know. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, an integrative nutrition health coach, a dietary supplement specialist, and she's got a bajillion other certifications and letters behind her name. But what I can guarantee you is that she is always coming from the heart. The heart space is really where she lives. She is a daily mindfulness practitioner. She has her routine on lock, and she's also a dear friend of mine. So I am so excited to bring you this conversation where we really dive into our cycles as the final episode of our 6-part mini-series here. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the menstrual cycle and the myths associated with it. You know, we all see these crazy trends online. Well, she's going to give us the real deal of the things to look out for from her 10 years of experience in working in this field in functional medicine. She's also going to teach us more about what functional medicine is and how it can help, as well as foundational ways to just overall improve your well-being. So I really hope that you guys enjoy the conversation, because I know I sure did. And here we go. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back to the Birthright Podcast. I am so excited, bouncing in my seat, because this is the very first time that I have a guest on this podcast, and it is someone who is so near and dear to my heart, and truly one of the reasons why I'm even sitting here today talking about women's health, talking about cycles and our bleed, and connecting to this. I've got Jacquelyn Miller on today from Rad Wellbeing. Hi, Jacquelyn.
Hi, I'm so excited for this conversation and so excited for what you are doing with this.
Yeah. And just thank you so much for all the work that you've done in women's health. I discovered Jacquelyn through a place here in Austin called Kuya, went to one of her workshops, and I was just blown away by the infinite well of wisdom that she contains when it comes to women's health. She really started opening up my perception to and perspectives on what being a well woman actually looks like. So today we've got a really great conversation for you guys to wrap up our mini series on the cycle. This is the final episode of the 6-part mini series, and thought there was no better person to bring on than an expert in functional medicine and functional well-being. So Jacquelyn, again, so happy to have you here. I'm so curious, what day in your cycle are you on as we speak?
I am day 15 as we speak, and it's fun. I'll touch on this while we chat. This moment in my cycle, in this phase of my cycle, which is, right at peak ovulation for me, does not feel at all how it normally feels. So not for better or worse, just an observation. But yes, day 15.
And how is it feeling for you today?
It's feeling like a textbook late luteal phase, which is
Mm.
super interesting. And we'll dive into this too, but I'm 37 and I'm already starting to feel some of the very, very, very early shifts of perimenopause, which
Mm.
I'll talk about. I'm hoping that we're moving in a direction where we get to redefine that phase leading into perimenopause and the cycle starts to feel different. And
Mhm.
I am experiencing that in my own life on demand right now.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like we can talk about it all day, but until we actually experience it. And for those of you listening, I'm 32, so I don't think I have entered that part of my journey just yet. But I am currently on day 22 and am experiencing also the luteal shifts. I mean, gosh, going from ovulation into luteal, it can really feel like the rug gets ripped out from under you sometimes, of just feeling like a different person. But you know, enough of talking about my cycle. I am so excited to hear from you, Jacquelyn, of how your relationship with your cycle has evolved over time.
Mm. It's an amazing question. I feel like we should ask every woman that
Mhm.
at any point in life. When I look back to when I started, really my whole life started shifting in a radically different direction, which was in my early 20s. And I moved out to California when I was 23 from growing up in the Midwest and the South. And I could write a book on, that whole phase of life and everything that it brought in. But when I think about reconnecting with my cycle, which was around that time, it was really a microcosm of a lot of greater shifts and pulling back the curtain on a lot of mainstream beliefs, mainstream indoctrination that I grew up with, and I think most women in America grew up with, unless they were frankly lucky just to be in a different environment where we were having these conversations and healthcare looked different. And so at that time, I was struggling tremendously with anxiety and depression and OCD, and I was on a quest to explore those things through a completely different light. And a book came into my life at that time, which was by Dr. Kelly Brogan. It's called A Mind of Your Own. And it's more focused on integrative mental health and really deconstructing Western psychiatry. But in that book, there was a whole chapter dedicated to women finding freedom from birth control. And
Mm.
growing up in the Midwest and South, these conversations weren't being had. I jumped on birth control at 16 years old. And as in most scenarios, conversations weren't had about, potential long-term implications. What does this really mean? And there was just no education around our cycles. And so it was no question asked. And every friend I had at the time was also on birth control. That really was just
Yeah.
our norm. And, I did it under the guise of telling my beloved mom, like, I want clear skin. And my skin wasn't even that bad at the time. I was just using it for a contraceptive, not knowing, again, what all those implications were. And so at 24, I read that book. I took out my Nuva ring at the time. And in hindsight, it was like, wow, what a bold move, because I did not know nearly what I know now about my cycle and how to work with it. But that was the beginning of the journey and the beginning of me, not even so much consciously claiming, but saying like, I'm going to realign with my body. This feels right. There was something about that choice that felt very logical. And
Mm.
after I took it out, I regulated well to some degree, but then also unearthed a lot of abnormalities in my own cycle. And that was through working with a naturopath at the time and understanding what a late luteal phase really means, or a short luteal
Mm.
phase, and just starting to get acclimated and acquainted with the different phases of cycle. And so it was quite a long journey that I've continued to redefine. And now I look at bleeds and a cycle as a fundamental litmus test of not just physical health, but overall, deep, truly holistic well-being for a woman. And it's front center of my practice for my premenopausal women, because I work with women. Youngest I have is 24, oldest I have is 76. And so for those women who are, still bleeding regularly, or if they're not, it's one of the biggest things we focus on. And now I've come to view it as really our expression as women of the divine, the sacred. Some people can call that God. I do. I think it's absolutely miraculous what happens in a woman's body, not just during the bleed, but the entire cycle, and all of the wordless wisdom that's woven into a woman's body in her cycle. So very full circle as to where I started with it a long, long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Beautifully said. I'm really celebrating that in you too, to think of being, 24 years old and to be making those kinds of decisions from just a book. I mean, it's so cool how a book can
It is.
change our entire lives. I didn't know that about your story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think it goes to show that for a lot of women, and I see this in practice every day, we make these decisions. For example, I just had a client that decided to get off her antidepressant, which was also, that's another facet for another time of my journey as well. But I was just like, I want you to remember that's a huge, amazing, badass decision. And
right.
we make these decisions for our bodies and our health. And sometimes we don't really understand how big and incredible they are, but they are. And so, yeah, when I think back to that, I'm like, yes, that's amazing that you decided to do that at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So awesome. And we have a lot of similarities in the beginning of our story too, of getting on birth control at a young age. I was about 15 when I got on mine, but didn't get off it until 30, which you were actually a big part of that and regulating my cycle post birth control.
Yes.
We talked last week on the podcast about cycle tracking, and I'm just curious, with your own cycle, what's your practice right now in tracking it? If you use any tools or if it's more of an intuitive connection that you have.
Yeah, I would say a mix of both at this point. So I've gone through many different experiments and just like, let's see what information this provides. Let's see, honestly, what this user experience is like, because I also want to be confident in my recommendations to the women I work with. So I do, this, I love the Anito tracker when there's a higher level of, sophistication that needs to be looked at. I've worked with the Mira tracker previously, but at this point, I do have an Oura Ring. Even if I didn't wear my Oura Ring, I would do a BBT reading every morning before I got out of bed. This just happens to do it for me, which is convenient. And so I'm tracking that to assess when ovulation is happening and to assess, the progesterone rise, and is it a sufficient rise to where it's actually changing BBT. And then it's just still always so cool and miraculous to me when I will see, the day that my bleed starts is when that temperature comes plummeting back down. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is all happening as it should. So I keep it simple these days, but I do think that there can be a time and a place that can be really helpful for the more sophisticated trackers. And then cervical fluid is still a huge one too. And again, whenever I see that, I'm like, this is amazing. This is so cool. So yeah.
Celebrating it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to hear that we're on the right track over here, because we touched on a lot of those things last week. So
Cool.
That's awesome. Well, when it comes to getting to know your cycle as a woman, because like I said, I was 30 years old when I started learning about all of this. So, and you taught me a lot of it. So I'd love to talk about what are some of the mistakes and myths that go into just thinking about the cycle in general. And what are some of the most common mistakes, would you say, that you see, maybe women who are coming to you for your practice, that's in regards to their cycle?
Yes. I think there's a couple layers of that. And I think exploring this through almost like a paradigm based philosophical lens can be helpful, because you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of the mistakes are really just around how we think about it and how what is our relationship to what's happening in our body and our cycles. And I think another important preface here is, and we both have talked about this and know this, you know, I use the phrase innocent mistakes almost every day in practice, because the women I'm working with, and even ourselves, it's never intentional. It's never meant to harm our body or, to blunt what our body is naturally trying to do. And so a lot of these that we'll talk about truly are innocent mistakes, because again, most of us just grew up not knowing better, and we got kind of stuck in this river of indoctrination with a lot of this stuff. So, and the other thing that I think is important here is, you said, you really dug into these things when you were in your 30s, and that's really what I see in practice. I've had dear friends, I've had many clients who are at 35 and 36 learning what ovulation is. And that to me is, I hate to use the word, but it's true. It's sad, because how in the world did we grow up not even knowing, what that is and when it happens? And I think about, and I'm probably going to butcher this. I never do a good job explaining GIFs or memes, but maybe it was a video I saw. It was a while ago, but it was an interviewer that was speaking to men on the street, and she was just asking the question, when do you think a woman can get pregnant? And I think there was like 4 different answers, like, well, every day. But a lot of women think that too. And so there's just so much here, that we're all working on learning. But I think to start from a fundamental lens is, we make this mistake of putting our reproductive health and our reproductive hormones in a box and thinking that those things behave in the body in a vacuum. And the reality is that everything in this magnificent body is inextricably connected. And so when we talk about quote unquote reproductive health or cycle health, we're not just talking about cycle health or reproductive health. We're talking about our gut microbiome health. We're talking about our inflammatory status. We're, of course, talking about the nervous system. We're talking about what signals are coming in through our life ecosystem of stress, sleep, fueling status. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I would love for women to reframe or understand, is that this body is a whole system. It's a symphony of different parts and players, but those parts and players are not operating on their own. I say to every woman, and especially my women who are working on conception support or fertility, your ovaries don't exist on an island. They are communicating with everything else. And I think the biggest challenge there, again, is that we were mostly brought up in a system of specialists, right? Where you go to the quote unquote reproductive specialist, you go to the gynecologist, and all they're talking to you about is this one isolated system. And we just have to step outside of that to really get into the crux of cycle health. And I think that, has a natural foray into also changing the way that we think about our cycle as something to, I quote unquote, control. And, I just say, like, the words control and human body should never even be in the same sentence, because we can't do that. And, I think a lot of that ties into, I know you've done such a beautiful job talking about menstrual shame and bringing that into awareness. I think it does tie into that a lot, because we see our bleeds and we see this cycle as something that is shameful or inconvenient or embarrassing. And once we can reframe that, I think it also allows us to step out of the mindset of wanting to control it through something like birth control. And so I think changing that is important too. But when just other innocent mistakes is the basic education, which is really what you're doing and changing and helping women fix, is understanding what are our cycle phases. I want every woman to be highly literate and highly comfortable using words like ovulation and follicular phase and luteal phase and estrogen and progesterone. I've had so many women over the years that are they'll kind of sheepishly be like, did I say that right? It's ovulation? I'm like, yes, like let's get
Shout
comfortable.
it from the rooftops.
Yes, exactly. Like, let's get really comfortable with these things, because that is your agency and that is your power as a woman to understand those phases and, as you put it, seasons that our body is going through. That's a huge just mistake that we make. And then, I think the other thing that I do really like to touch on in this, again, kind of silo of innocent mistakes, is assuming that your body is going to feel one way during a phase of your cycle. And I touched on this at the very beginning, but I think really one of my only qualms with the cycle education space, and I think kind of what it can do to women's brains, is, and I understand how it happens, because education wise, the goal of education is often to kind of put things in easy to understand categories.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'll often hear, so many women being like, well, late luteal's coming up, it's going to be a shit show. And, we automatically put that label. And what I want to help shift with women is, yes, know your phase and know, kind of what are the archetypal, maybe things that are common, but listen to this every day, right? Check in with your body every day. We should be in an on-demand conversation with our bodies around how we're feeling, how resourced we are, how much we need to rest, versus just saying, well, here's a stamp, I'm in this part of my cycle and this is how I'm going to feel. And it's like, we don't know that. And I've had times where late luteal and my bleed are actually some of the most energized points of my cycle. And so I won't adapt how I'm training, and I will kind of go about my day in a pretty normal way. But then I've had other times where as I shared at the beginning, I'll be in ovulation and I'm like, wow, this does not feel like ovulation right now. And
Mm-hmm.
so I listen and I tune in and I let myself rest more and I don't push. So I think it's, again, helping redefine, not even redefine, but just return to our body awareness and being in a loving, compassionate conversation with our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's
A lot.
so many
Yeah.
little nuggets I want to go off on there, because I love that you're bringing up this point of that we as humans just don't fit in little perfect boxes.
Mhm.
And so I love that message. It's actually not even something I've thought of before, of how using the archetypes and creating education in that way, it actually can be a little bit exclusive of the whole experience, of like the main message just being to listen to your body and do what's right for you. Because also with that, like you said, one of the biggest innocent mistakes that you see is women thinking that all of this happens in a vacuum, and that every other system, sleep, stress, what you're eating, how much screen time you're getting, how much
Mm.
sunlight you're getting, are you going out in nature, even like posture, like
Yes.
all of this stuff actually impacts it. So
Mm.
it's not to say that you're going to feel at one way during your cycle because that's the time of the cycle that you're in. It's this whole picture
Yes.
gets painted. And then you also touched on it being a mindset. Like that's always an easy place to start, of shifting the framework of having a bleed as something to be empowered by instead of something to be ashamed of, which can be such an individual journey for so
Yeah.
many people, depending on how you grew up. And, our big overculture kind of giving us all of those subliminal messages that it's an inconvenience. But I love all of those things so much. So you also spoke to, I'm sure you have some women that come to see you because they have irregularities
Mhm.
in their periods, or they have painful periods, or they have, acne, or some of these issues that we typically hear associated with PMS.
Mhm.
And so I'm just wondering your take on PMS, and is that normal, or is that something that we should be a bit more curious about as women?
Yeah. I think this needs to get a lot of airtime in a lot of
Mm.
different capacities, not just from me, from all women, because um, it's funny, offline, just as friends the other day, we were talking about that phrase contextually appropriate. And
Yeah.
that's what I think of when I think of PMS. I always give the very important preface that if any symptom that you experience throughout your cycle, and for most women, that is going to be kind of in that bucket of PMS based symptoms or when they're actually on their bleed. But if any symptom at all is debilitating, keeping you in bed, I have some women who, consistently would have to call into work, not
Mhm.
be able to show up for work, get to a place where you feel like you're losing your capacity to work with your emotional terrain, meaning like you're just in rage fits or can't stop crying. Like those are things I look at as, more in that kind of like quality of life really plummets. Those are not so normal, and that's where, any one of those things would be a big flashing check engine light in a woman's body. But to go back to that idea of contextually appropriate, when we think about PMS and what's happening, there's a couple things there. Those, let's say, 3 to 4 days leading up to the cycle, your hormonal rug has been pulled out from underneath you. All of the serotonergic impacts, dopaminergic impacts of estrogen have left the building. The calming impacts of progesterone on sleep and mood have also left the building. And your body is entering a high, this is one thing that I think a lot of women just don't know. Again, those 3 to 4 days, and I'm using that time frame loosely, but the time leading up to your bleed and during your bleed, that is a highly inflammatory event in a woman's
Mm.
body, and therefore an immune event as well. And so it makes sense to have some symptoms in that period leading up to it and during your bleed, because our hormone rug has been pulled out, we're inflamed. So, yes, naturally, there is going to be some symptoms. And so I want to normalize those. But again, when it starts to tip the scales into debilitating quality of life, you can't go about a day like you normally would. That's when the scales have started to tip, and there's a sign that there's something bigger going on. But a lot of the women I work with, and myself included, some of the common kind of PMS things that I think are normal and appropriate would be a little bit of a headache the day before, the day you start your bleed. I always have at least a little moderate headache the day before, so I know that's another sign. A little bit of increased low back tension, because if you think about it, your whole
Mm.
kind of pelvic floor and womb is pulling down on those muscles. That can be a little common. I do personally think that cramps can be contextually appropriate and normal, but again, really painful cramps where you've got to bust out the heating pad, get in a hot bath, lay down for hours, I don't consider those normal. Obviously, some mood fluctuations are also normal. And I actually think those are really sacred. That's the time to tune in. And I think a lot of women will chalk up those mood changes leading up to the cycle or in it as like, well, I'm just hormonal, I'm on my period. It's like, no, that's gold. I've had a friend and mentor say like that's when the veil is the thinnest. And
Mhm.
so paying attention to what's happening emotionally during that time is really valid and important. But of course, it's going to be different than, peak ovulation when you've got estrogen surging and, your
I'm
body's
a
in
hype
that.
girl.
Yeah, exactly. That spring season. So that's my take on PMS. I really, I used to have the belief that cycles should be quote unquote, absolutely seamless, and like you shouldn't even know that they're coming on. And that might be the case some months. Some months I am still surprised. I'm like, I really haven't noticed much at all. But again, that goes back to kind of what we're saying about checking in on a more consistent basis and not expecting anything to be exactly the same on a month to month basis, because the body is never the same. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of my take on PMS and what is appropriate and what's not so appropriate.
Mhm. Yeah, we have to be the investi I call it like being a scientist and
Totally. Yeah.
collecting the data on my own body because I think one thing that's been surprising for me as I have deepened my education and knowledge in this field, and my more and more conversations with women who have connected to their cycles, is just how unique we all are, and how it goes back to the whole body being connected. Like, we all live different lives. We have different sets of experiences and environments that we live in, and it all impacts the cycle.
Yes.
So is there anything you would want to add to that, of like just the uniqueness of women? And, I think sometimes we can get on social media and see like trends and stuff in health, and think that that's what we need to be doing. But I'm just wondering what you would say to the woman who maybe is out there struggling and sees something working for someone. Like, how would you approach that? And what would be the first step that you would want them to take to really get to know their own body?
That is a wonderful inquiry. And two things come up for me is the first is understanding, and maybe not even understanding, the reminder of genetics. And I've always been of the mindset that, our genes are profoundly impacted by epigenetics. So just again, like the ecosystem of our life and the
Mm-hmm.
choices that we make that ultimately communicate with our genes of how to do their jobs or not do their jobs, or function or dysfunction. But I've interestingly come across, just in these last couple months in practice, this kind of like almost like headbutting of genetics, where I'm working with women that are truly doing everything right, quote unquote, like everything right from a generalized perspective and a personalized perspective. And things are just not going the way that one would anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the role of genes, and I think about the fact that, our mothers are hardwired in us, our obviously our fathers too. But as a woman, going back to this idea of like every cycle, one woman's cycle norms are going to look different than the others. And it makes me think about our mothers' histories and our grandmothers and great grandmothers' histories of their cycles. And that's also not to say that we're bound to have the same hormonal challenges or positive impacts that they had. But I just think that genes are powerful, and we can see the way that genes express themselves very often through good lab work. And that is a reason why I've, chosen to go down a path of work that brings data into the picture. And I always give the caveat that, like, data isn't everything. To me, data is very masculine, right? It's like very much in that the hard world, and there's a world that a lot of people live in that's like, at the throne of science and the throne of medicine and the throne of data. And I'm like, okay, well, we can take the data and take the value in it, and more importantly, blend that intelligently with your lived experience and your body's history and what is happening on demand to create what your unique body needs. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's not a direct answer to that question, but I would say, for the woman who is struggling with all of that noise, um, start with the basics. And I think the challenge, we've talked about this a lot, the challenge with social media and where we're at is, the beautiful thing is we're getting a lot of increased awareness and information. But I still think that one of the main messages is, here's this shiny new object, here's this hack. And in reality, I just want every woman to start by getting really good sleep and addressing her pre-sleep routine and her morning ritual, and getting those things dialed in, and lessening her toxin load, and getting outside and being in connection with Mother Earth. And, obviously there's so many nutritional inputs in that too, but start with the basics. That's what I would always say. And then, you can enter a space where then you're starting to learn a little bit more about what are your unique body's nuances, even when you have the basics down. Because what I have found is that, even with those things really mastered, and women doing a lot of the quote unquote right things, there's still things we need to learn, and there's still nuances and, very interesting idiosyncrasies of each of our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad that you touched on one, the importance of lifestyle as being such a simple,
Yeah.
free
Yes,
switch. And but it takes like a really honest you got to have a really honest look at,
you do.
what are the things that we're doing. We're so obsessed, I feel like, and I'm absolutely guilty of this, of wanting to find the quickest fix
Oh,
to
yeah.
things. And I'm like, surely this supplement will take it all away, or you can have everything super dialed in, but like you said, if you're like staring at your phone first thing in the morning before you even get out of bed, like that does have an impact. I
Oh,
think I read that in your newsletter.
yeah, and well,
Yeah.
it's something, we're both evangelists for this. It makes me think of there's a Marianne Williamson excerpt from one of her books about, and it's longer. Again, I won't quote it because I'll butcher it, but just if you don't let light in the morning, darkness will fill your house by
Mm.
noon is kind of the
Oh.
quote. And yeah, and
Mm.
she means that literally and metaphorically of like, think about, I mean, I could talk about this for hours of what is the way we think about food going into our body and communicating with ourselves. We have to think about the you know, technology stimuli as food for the brain.
Mm.
And most people are feeding the brain the equivalent of McDonald's, and all of this stuff that we watch on, whether it's social media, TV. We were laughing about like how intense some movies have gotten now, and we've become so
Crazy.
desensitized. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, that's a huge impact, and you're touching on something that I have seen both in my own life and with so many other women. Is I just really don't think most human beings realize, we throw around the phrase dysregulated nervous system, in my opinion, actually too much these days, but people don't realize, really the state that their nervous system is in and how that system is always on and hyper vigilant and in this state of like there's an subconscious belief like something's wrong, I have to fix something, whether
Mhm.
it's in myself or the world around us. And that, I think, wreaks more havoc on the body than any other signal input that we have. But it is a tough one to see clearly.
Mhm. What practices do you have that helps you to see that clearly?
Meditation has changed my life.
Yeah.
It really is that simple, and I could again talk on that for hours because
Mhm.
that's been a long journey of mine. And um, I think so many people misunderstand it still as like the goal is to get the brain to stop, and that doesn't happen. I've been meditating for over a decade, and I can tell you, I don't think I've had longer than maybe 1 second, if I'm lucky, of brain quote unquote stopping. But what it does is just help you see clearly.
Mm.
And I think that would be, my goal and my hope for any human being is to see their life clearly, to see their thoughts clearly, to see their emotional patterns clearly, because all of that is also what helps this body harmonize
Yeah.
and do what it's designed to do. But
Mhm.
other than that, I mean, there's a lot of nervous system practices I love. We're just said the other day, like I always think of you when I do legs up the wall, but that really is
Mhm.
one of my favorite practices because it's so simple. And from again going back to data, when I look at my Oura Ring after 10 minutes of that, it's wild to see,
Mm.
how the stress physiology has changed. I love breath work too. I love touch, massage. I mean, anything that feels soothing and delicious for the nervous system, I'm all on board with. And I think, like many things, that's individualized for each woman of like, what is your nervous system's language of safety and comfort and pleasure, and exploring what that is, and then bringing those practices into your life consistently.
Mm. We'll have to do a whole other episode on pleasure
I would love
and connecting to the body in that way. But just to touch on legs up the wall, I just wanted to share that after our retreat, we've hosted a retreat together. We sat in our room with legs up the wall for probably over an hour just chatting. And so I'm like, if you're catching up with a girlfriend and you
Yes.
guys can do legs up the wall, that's a great time to
Yes.
just lay down, put your legs up on the wall, and experience the bliss of relaxation and letting those hips get realigned.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, bringing it back to the cycle, one of something that I've experienced personally that I was curious about was long cycles. So
Mhm.
my cycle sometimes is like 35 days or so.
Mhm.
And I learned from my acupuncturist that it's a potential to actually not ovulate.
Mhm.
And I had no idea that was even a thing. So I was just curious about, from your perspective, how important is ovulation? And if someone is having longer cycles, is that something that they should look at of like confirming if they're actually ovulating?
Absolutely. Absolute hard yes there. I think one of the myths that I do see about cycles is like I'll see this kind of when a woman's early on her journey of learning about cycles, she'll think that the benchmark is working towards that like perfect 28 days. And
Mhm.
that's great. I had many, many years of my life where every month on the nose was 28 days, and that was awesome. And that's starting to change a little bit. But I would say you can start to see when a cycle goes either way on the opposite end of that spectrum and turns to a short cycle. So anything less than 27, 26 days typically indicates a short luteal phase. The opposite of that is going longer. And I would agree with your acupuncturist. I've always had my personal perspective has been anytime a cycle gets longer than about 35 days, the higher the chances are that it was an anovulatory cycle, and meaning an egg wasn't released or matured. And I think for women who are peak reproductive years, if you're not ovulating every cycle, there's something that's time to lift up the hood. There's something,
Mhm.
there to take a deeper look at, because there's no reason, if you are healthy, and again, if all these systems are harmonized and communicating together in the way that they're designed, you should be ovulating. And so I think either end of that spectrum, short or long, is absolutely worth investigating, and probably just starting, as you mentioned, with some tracking and getting clear on, am I still ovulating? Are you seeing that temperature rise, or are you using another tracking tool? And if you're not, I have I have a lot to say on if you're not. There's a lot of things that can be done, because I have worked with a large number of women now who either weren't cycling at all or had very long cycles, and restoring those has become one of the most rewarding parts of this gig. And there's everything that contributes to a long cycle, a missing cycle, an anovulatory cycle is actually very easy to fix most of the time. So,
Mhm.
but it absolutely, I think, warrants action.
Mhm. Okay. And yeah, would you recommend doing labs for a woman who is at that point, or would you start with something like Anito for daily tracking of hormones?
Yeah, I that would actually be my preference, is to start with Anito.
Mhm.
But, just to get super clinical in perspective, I would absolutely still run labs that were more metabolically driven, assessing inflammation levels, assessing certain nutrients. I really go back to that metabolic component, because all of those things, then you can start to understand what are some of the roots of this potentially dysregulated cycle, while you're getting that on demand day to day snapshot from something like an Anito. So, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I gotta give you a plug here because, like, when I was getting off of birth control, I was on birth control for 15 years, and I had a cycle that was 74 days long, and that was when I was like, "I need help,"
Yeah.
because this world can feel really overwhelming, especially when it seems like we're just learning this information as adults, and I feel like the conversation around it is becoming much more mainstream now. At least that's what my algorithm knows I
Yeah.
like. So
Same. We we might be outliers. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, all of my content is related to
Mhm.
women's health and periods and everything. But I just wanted to say that if you are struggling with extreme symptoms, with really long or really short cycles, and you're not sure where to start, that having a resource and someone on your team like Jacquelyn is so incredible. I mean, I just felt really supported when we were working together through solving the mysteries of what my body was doing after birth control. And after just a few months of understanding my labs and understanding my Anito results and getting some supplementation in place, then I was experiencing really normal cycles with, just a few days, give or take, of variance. And now they've become like my favorite thing on planet Earth to talk about. So
I love
I
that.
just want
Full
to let
circle.
everyone know, yeah, like there's support out there, and so many resources and tools. And I personally like the human touch of having someone to like yourself to speak with and to help me understand these labs and things.
Yeah, and it's, there's someone coined the term DIY health many years ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it can be a really exhausting place to be in for too long. And
Yeah.
even to this day, I've been in this space a very long time, and I still want to have my own guides and trusted advisors, I call them, of people where I'm like, I don't want to just keep second guessing what I'm doing and what is your experience with this, and blending those two together, and not in a guru way. I never want to be that for women, but just a voice of reason, a trusted guide, and someone who just makes them feel cared for, because I deeply, deeply care about the women I work with so much. And I just think that's really what's missing in quote unquote health care is we
The
don't
care.
feel that most. So yeah, the care part of that. And there's a reason, I keep my practice small for that reason. Like, I just want to be that, that soft and caring place to land for women, and really just a source of no bullshit too. I'm going to
Mhm.
give you the good and the bad and the pros and the cons. And what that means sometimes, and I think this can be challenging for some women, is like, sometimes I'm not going to give you a clear answer. And that's by design, because we don't always know the clear answer. And I
Mhm.
think that one of the patterns I've seen a lot with the women I work with, and just humans in general, myself very much included, is our brains crave and search for certainty, and we
Mhm.
want that clear, here's the right answer. And we very, very rarely have that luxury in the body. But we can also have a lot of very educated hypotheses and guidance, and I get to see that guidance work most of the time, which is very rewarding. But
Mhm.
it's a murky, very nuanced, very personalized thing, is this human body we live in.
Absolutely. I mean, having been doing this work for over a decade now on your side, how have you seen the conversation around women's health
Mm,
shift?
that's a great question. My knee jerk. Oh, my knee jerk. And, this is just what's coming to mind immediately is, number one, I am thrilled, of course, that, and maybe it is just our algorithms. We'll hope for the better there. But, I am thrilled to see more conversations like this, and more women empowering themselves in so many different ways. Um, I feel like there's still a lot of masculinity in the space, even in some female practitioners. And that's not wrong or bad. But I think about this whole trend recently of, and I'm sure you've heard this phrase, but the menopause, and this kind of group of
I
clinicians.
haven't.
Okay, yeah, you'll get it on your algorithm later today.
Yeah.
It'll come up for you. But there's a group of clinicians, and I have I call it the middle path perspective. There's very few things that I hear or listen to that I'm automatically like, there's nothing I hear that I say that's wrong. that's bad. I will listen to everything. And one of the benefits of being in this space for a long time is you literally do hear everything, and you see every trend come and go and fizzle out, and conflicting research come out 3 years later, all of those things. But there's a group of women that I just think are really hammering in this, like, perimenopause and menopause are awful, and if you don't do HRT, that's the only way to quote unquote get through and not suffer. And I am, for the most part, an advocate for HRT. And we were talking just the other day, I shared with you, like, my perspective on that has changed. But there's this masculine feeling to all of it, of like, give your health and your body to the science. And there's just something about it that energetically for me feels still like that hard pushing, kind of dominant, like the shadow side of masculinity, like dominant male approach, even though it's coming from women. And I do struggle with that sometimes. And the flip side of that coin is, again, I'm just glad it's being talked about. I'm glad we're legitimately taking perimenopause and menopause seriously and giving women solutions and alternatives. We had black box warnings on estrogen for decades prior to this, when I've had many women say that estrogen has saved their marriage, has saved their health, has saved their mood. So there's always flip sides of the coins and nuances to these things. And I have seen the space change a lot. And I always want it to be embedded in true femininity and women who are educating and leading from their own feminine. Not that we have to be super soft and vulnerable all the time, but aren't, saying this is the one right way, because again, that's not how the body works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been really interesting for me to even start the discussion of perimenopause and menopause and learn about these things. I mean, last year, I think, was the first time that I heard menopause framed as the second spring.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? Like, I've only ever heard of menopause as, hot flashes. It's a terrible time of your life. And basically, life is over after that.
Right.
And I'm glad that we're mentioning this, even though this mini series is focused on the menstrual
Mhm.
cycle. But if you are a woman who has a menstrual cycle, you're going to go through
Yes.
perimenopause and menopause. And the earlier you can understand it and learn about it, just like I believe younger women need to be taught more about the menstrual cycle before they go through it. It's like the decisions that we're making now when it comes to our overall wellness of our body. And if we have a healthy cycle, I 100% believe that that's going to impact the experience that we have in perimenopause and menopause and those rites of passage as a woman that, we're going to go through no matter what. And if you haven't heard of HRT, that's hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
And yeah, we could have a whole other episode on that because I'm really curious to learn more about it too. But yeah, thank you for that perspective. I'm really glad that the conversations are happening more, and
Mhm.
that's my hope and my prayer with this podcast, is that it reaches the ears of women who need to hear it and they see the value in understanding this part of our body that got like maybe 1 or 2 hours of lecture in in your anatomy and physiology class,
Yes.
maybe, like,
Maybe.
with just textbook drawings, which are so inaccurate as well. I
I
mean,
know.
even just the word vagina being used for so long, and actually finding out that the external anatomy is called the vulva,
Right. Right. Yes.
not the vagina. And so, yeah, there's so much to learn, but it's an exciting time. There's so much information out there. So, I also offer just a word of caution of just finding the people and the sources that feel good for you to be intaking this information from, and remember that you are in control of
Yes.
your body, and how something works for one person, it could be completely different in how it works for you.
Absolutely.
So as we're wrapping up here, I would love to just like quick fire a couple questions at you and just
Go for it.
whatever comes to mind. One thing I'm wondering is if you had a piece of advice for women on nutrition,
Mm.
like what is one of the just top things that comes to mind of something that they could do or shift today regarding how they're eating specifically for their cycle?
Number one is just always eat real foods. I mean, it's not the challenge with a lot of these suggestions when we were talking about lifestyle medicine is they're not sexy, they're not exciting, you don't get the dopamine hit of pressing purchase on some supplement. But eating real food is always going to serve everyone. And of course, there's a lot of nuances behind that for each woman, but that's, for the most part, going to be very supportive for anyone. And I am an absolute evangelist for educating women and empowering women to eat enough. That was hands down. I was shocked. It was hands down my biggest learning curve and aha kind of epiphany when I really started combing through, higher volumes of labs was just how many women are underfueled. And when you really understand the ripple effect that has on the hormonal system, that's the biggest change. And I think I could make that even simpler for women to understand by saying the body has to feel resourced to have a healthy cycle, resourced energetically, rest wise, fuel wise, not in fight or flight all the time. And food is a way that we communicate fundamental safety to the body. And so when we aren't eating enough, which again is almost always innocent, or, to use the social media examples, where I've had multiple women come in who are fasting and they're not getting their period. And I'm like, this is actually very straightforward. And there's a time and a place for that too, but that's not it. And so adequately fueling your body with, 3 good solid meals a day, not doing super prolonged fasting. I consider 12 hours, I don't consider that a fast. I consider that just a biologically appropriate break.
Sure.
Start there and eat real food. And there's so much more I could say, but I know we're keeping it simple. So I'm going to say those
Quick
two
fire.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I can bookmark that for another episode also.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm also wondering your thoughts on cold plunges for women, especially around cycles, because I've heard a lot of this being talked about right now.
Yeah, I am absolutely of the camp of, doing that during peak, like end of follicular ovulation is cool. I love cold plunges. They make my nervous system feel amazing. It's also not something I'm going to go out of my way to do. I'm just lucky because my shower gets really cold. But I would not recommend them during late luteal and the bleed. The nervous system, again, is already in a very heightened, we're far more inclined to be in a sympathetic dominant nervous system state. And again, there's a lot of inflammation happening, which one might think, oh, well, there's inflammation, let's cold plunge. I think the pros are not there. So I would say if it feels good, again, check in with the body. If it feels good during that peak hormone phase, cool. I wouldn't be much of an advocate for it when we're in that low hormone phase later.
Okay, folks, you heard it here. We got to eat enough, and we got to keep our wombs nice and warm for that luteal phase and our bleed. Are there any other just little tips that you would give to women for making the time of either luteal or their bleed a bit more comfortable?
Oh, I mean, the visual I get when you say that is just like cozy, right? And again, I know you've done such a beautiful job educating on the seasonality of it. It's the same way that we would think about fall or winter.
Right.
Well, what do we do during fall and winter to make ourselves comfortable? There's blankies, there's loose, soft clothes, there's layers, there's tees, all of those things. Socks, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. Lovely socks. All of those things come to mind, like snuggling with pets. But I do think using that time wisely as an emotional and spiritual catalyst. I am a big fan of that. And I don't always do the best job of that myself either. But when I take the time to journal more, introspect more, be in nature more, let myself cry, let myself dance topless in my family room. Like just
Yes.
really, I mean, you can do those things anytime. I would love for women to be doing those all the time. But I think when that curtain is pulled back in those more kind of vulnerable, soft stages of the cycle, the outcome is really potent and really impactful. And I think it stays with you through the rest of the cycle.
Love that. Yeah. Speaking of, I'm like, my feet are freezing right now and I should be wearing my socks.
I have on, I've got my favorite slippers on. So
Oh,
I hear you.
nice.
It's cold here today. So
Yeah. Well, Jacquelyn, this has just been so much fun and
yeah.
so insightful getting to deepen on this conversation that is so near and dear to my heart and hopefully, to all of the women who are listening. I'm sure if they're listening that they care about this topic. But I would love if you want to share how anyone listening can connect with you and then we can share a little bit about our retreat as well.
Yes, I would love that. If you're curious about going on the client journey, that's really what I call it. It is a journey. I do a 30-minute complimentary discovery call, and I love connecting with women that way. I'm down to taking 3 new clients a month at this point, which is by design. And then you can also, you know this, I'm not the best on social media, but I recently started some good YouTube content that I think, I really hope can serve women in that way. And that's pretty easy to find, just Rad Wellbeing on YouTube. And I'll keep it simple for that.
Yeah. And I'll link those in the show notes as
Thank
well
you.
so everyone can find you easily.
Cool.
But again, I cannot recommend Jacquelyn enough for this health journey. If this is a path that you want to go down, which I highly recommend doing so, because I do believe that what we uncovered during our time working together has influenced me to make changes in my life that are going to impact me for the years to come, for my fertility, for longevity, all of the things that are really, really important. And I'm just so thrilled to also share that Jacquelyn and I are going to be hosting our second retreat together this summer in June, from June 4th through the 7th. So it's called the Way Back Home Retreat. And this time it's the mountain edition. So
Yay.
Jacquelyn is located in Fort Collins, Colorado, and we're going to be hosting it in Red Feather Lakes, which is, what is it, about an hour
Yeah.
outside of Fort
Yeah.
Collins? Yeah, just about an hour outside of there. So I'll link the website for that as well. But imagine just a weekend, or not even a weekend, it's like 3.5,
4
4
days.
days.
Yeah.
4 days of conversations like this around wellness, around mindfulness, movement, yoga, having professional photography done, goddess photo
Mhm.
shoots, all in this beautiful setting in the Rocky Mountains surrounded by the aspen trees. And oh gosh, it's going to be so magical. Do you have anything you want to add on the retreat, Jacquelyn?
Just that I've really been thinking about this a lot lately. I mean, it's really almost hard to put into words what these experiences
Yes.
are like. And I think for some women who haven't gifted themselves, because that's really what this is a gift to yourself. If you haven't gifted yourself a retreat, it can be challenging to grasp, like, well, why do I even really need this, or what's the benefit? And it's just like you have to experience it to really know it. Because what I witnessed from our retreat in November was just transformation, was space for care, for love. I mean, it just felt like we were living in this women's commune of just like joy and realness and just humanness together. And so, yeah, it's just a transformative, incredible experience. And I think it's very courageous to participate in a retreat in the best way possible. So we would love to see anyone there listening to this.
Yeah, welcoming you all with open arms. We just have a few spots remaining. So if that speaks to you, then check out the link in the show notes. But other than that, Jacquelyn, I just want to say thank you for spending your afternoon with us here. I feel like I always learn new things every time I hear from you, and am just so honored to call you a friend, and also just someone who's always on my team and a champion for my health. It feels really good to have that kind of support. So thank you for your wisdom.
Sister. Thank you for yours, and thank you for creating this space for women.
Absolutely. And there hopefully will be many more podcasts to come between Jacquelyn and I. We've got a lot to talk about.
We have so much.
All right. Love you, Jacquelyn.
Love you too.